In this video, I'm going to teach you how to create badass silhouette portraits. Okay, so the first thing to creating a good silhouette portrait is to do the obvious, is to expose the image to be a silhouette. And this first requires you to have a background that's brighter than the subject. And then from there, you're gonna underexpose the subject. If you're shooting in manual mode, this just means that you're exposing for the highlights. You use a lower ISO or a higher shutter speed, or you stop down the aperture in order to get that underexposed subject. And if you're using some type of auto mode, maybe aperture priority, shutter priority, that kind of thing, what you're gonna do is use the exposure compensation and dial that down a little bit to get the silhouette, or you meter off the bright background using something like spot metering and lock the exposure there. That's also going to give you a silhouette exposure. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, let's create that badass element. And the first way is to introduce some motion. So if you're not really great at posing, well, this one's going to be for you. You basically want to direct the subject into doing something interesting. So you either have them do some type of dancing or motion or running, walking, that kind of thing. And what you're going to do is really encourage them to exaggerate the movements of that action, and this is going to create that ever so great separation of the subject from the background, and also separate them from their limbs and stuff like that from blending in together. So the next way to create that badass silhouette portrait is to find a natural frame. So what you're going to do is scan the scene for anything that you can frame your subject within, next to, or against. So here you want to think of architecture, tree branches, or anything interesting that has an interesting shape that will provide context and or interest for the viewer so that they can lock right onto the subject, or at least see a great type of scene where the subject is silhouetted within a really nice focal point or a pocket within the scene. The next thing to do is make use of color. Because you're underexposing the background, this will actually make the colors really nice and bold and saturated. So let's lean into that a little bit. Take advantage of all the colors and look for color palettes, color combinations, and that kind of stuff. Here we're thinking of stained glass, sunsets, anything that's going to create some interesting colors so that you can accentuate the colors and the subject at the same time to create context, interest, and again, make it badass. So what do you do if you don't have an interesting area or you don't have any type of bright background behind you? Well, guess what? You can create silhouette portraits anywhere. So if you bring your own video light or flash, all you got to do is basically aim the light at the background and have the subject stand in front of it. From there, just dial the lights to be brighter than the subject, and then again, underexpose for the subject, and then guess what? You have an awesome way to create some type of variety and interest to a shoot, even if there's nothing actually interesting going on in that environment or with your subject. Okay, so now that we got kind of the ideas and the exposure type stuff out of the way, now it really comes to getting those poses down right. The first thing is to separate the limbs for these full body silhouette portraits. And when it comes to full body silhouettes, or what I like to call epic silhouettes or hero silhouettes, the important thing is to have the subject, again, exaggerate their body language and encourage them really to separate out their limbs. So this means having them spread their feet apart, also asking them to put a little gap in between their arms, bend their arms a little bit so that you allow those little pockets of light to show through, and tell the viewer like, hey, this is an arm right here, there's light coming through so they can see it, as opposed to having like this giant shadowy blob. This is what's going to set you apart, to have these really epic silhouettes with crazy scenes that are shadowy and have the subject just stand out perfectly. And then my last tip goes for those kind of like intimate silhouettes that are getting close together, is really just mind the gap. So when creating an intimate silhouette where the two subjects are having a moment, their heads are really close, with portrait photography, typically you're going to want them to have them touch their heads, to kiss each other, that kind of thing. Fight this temptation and do not have them touch their foreheads together. Instead, what you're going to want to do is have them touch their foreheads momentarily and then separate ever so slightly, like a centimeter or like half an inch. And what that's going to do is highlight the facial profiles of both subjects. And this is really kind of the final missing piece to make a regular silhouette into a badass silhouette portrait. And that's pretty much all I got for you. So please be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more Fujifilm or photography videos. And if you haven't already, go ahead and follow me on Instagram at ReggieBPhoto for new tips, tricks, and tutorials every single day. Remember to get out, go shoot, and I'll catch you all in the next one.